What's going on, everybody? My name is Nick.
And my name is Dave.
And this is the Deep Dive, and we are in our third week of this storyteller season, or a series.
Yeah.
And we're talking about the treasure and the pearl, the two different parables, but similar in context.
Right.
That I'm sure you're going to get into.
That's what our subject matter is today.
It's the plan. So we're going to stick with the plan, and we're going to get into it.
That's what I preached on yesterday. So
Okay.
Let's get going.
Let's do it. All right, Dave. So I've been thinking. I think the way you should culminate this series is by getting a recliner on stage and getting a big book and reading us a story.
I'll take that into consideration.
Yeah, I think you should. I think it'd be fun.
Yeah, it has been about storytelling and parables, and it's been fun. We're doing this on a Monday today because we didn't record yesterday.
That's right.
So,
you had a gig, a bluegrass gig. How'd that go?
It was extremely hot, but it was fun.
Yeah.
We had a great time. It was very hot, but I really appreciate everyone accommodating my schedule so we could do this on a Monday. We used to always do them on Mondays.
Sure. Or Tuesdays.
But we've been doing it on Sundays lately, and this has got to be very interesting for the listeners. But we're doing this on Monday.
What it is.
Doing this on Monday, and so let's get going.
Let's do it. Well, why don't you kind of start off by kind of giving us a breakdown of the sermon, and we'll kind of dive into some of the points.
So we are the title of the series, the summertime series, is parables, our storyteller. It's the parables of Jesus. And so the first 2 weeks we looked at two very famous ones, and they're also sort of in a long form. Mm-hmm. A lot of the parables that Jesus told were just a couple of verses. Yeah. And that was the case today. He gives we call them more illustrations more than stories. But he's talking about the kingdom of God, and that's important because that's the theme of both these parables. And he says, the kingdom of God is like, or the kingdom of heaven is like, same thing. In Matthew's gospel, which these come from, he says they always refer to it as heaven, the kingdom of heaven. But anyway, so this is the kingdom of heaven is like, and he said, there's a man going out, walking across someone else's property,
right?
And he comes across a treasure that's there, and so then he gets excited. He covers it up. He sells everything that he has so that he can buy the treasure.
Right.
And the second one is about a pearl merchant. A pearl merchant, who looks at pearls all day, sifting through pearls. He finds one that is most exquisite, most beautiful. Sometimes we call it the pearl of great price. He finds the pearl. He goes out and sells everything that he owns so that he can buy a pearl. Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is like that. And so that's where we kind of begin.
Right.
And so just quickly reading through them, we kind of can get the impression that, the kingdom of heaven is worth a lot. It costs a lot.
Yeah, it's so special that you don't want to give up everything for it.
You want to give everything for it. And that is a way of approaching it. But I think the mystery, the gift of the parables, so sometimes there's a lot more layers there. Some of them, and I'm going to preach one, I think the next one I preach on, it's not quite so easy to understand. And maybe this one, it can lead us to a place that maybe wasn't intended for it to lead. But let's just start off by talking about the first one. And I spent some time on this yesterday, so I won't spend a ton of time on there. But first reading, if you read this very deeply, it almost looked like there's some dishonesty going on, right?
Yeah, you're stumbling upon, you're walking on somebody else's property for one.
Yeah.
And you stumble on a treasure and you're like, I could just keep this treasure.
Yeah. And so, then it says he covers it up.
Right.
And goes, and so just the cultural context to the audience that Jesus was speaking to,
right?
And it's kind of be hard for us to get out of our 24-hour sort of cultural sort of bias and stuff. But for them, it wouldn't be. First of all, it wasn't unusual for there to be treasure buried in holes somewhere. I mean,
Right.
we talk about like, some old timers and people maybe grew up in the war era and you go and look at their property and they got stuff buried everywhere. But, it goes back even a lot further. There's no banks, there's no safety deposit boxes. And there's also people that would come, robbers, I guess, but also, in Jesus's time, there were the Roman soldiers who might come and pillage stuff. And so in order to protect that, people would find a secure place and then they would bury it.
Yeah.
And then they would know where it was. But then something might happen. They might be killed or die or move away or under the Roman siege. Something might have happened. And so having buried treasure was, not super unusual. It happened.
Right.
And so but there's also, if you go back into the Jewish law, where if you break it down past the Ten Commandments and get into a lot of that, plus some other addition stuff that we don't have in the Bible that are sort of accessory to the Old Testament law, there's a lot of laws and rules and things governing the Jewish people. And one of the things was that, like, if something is not inside your house, secured inside of your house, it's kind of open game for anybody. It's kind of
Right.
finders, keepers. I didn't realize that, and it's really hard for me because of the way we've been culturalized to think that
Yeah,
that
it's
would
like your
be,
property, all your stuff.
That would be okay for like your boats in your front yard. I'm going to say, but that what they wouldn't have not heard it that way as there being something unethical going on. So the guy stumbles across this property and it's so great. And so he leaves. And one of the key words or little parts of the verse that I jumped on was, it says, and with joy. And so it was the joy of discovering this treasure.
Yeah.
The same with the guy with the pearl merchant. He's looked at, I don't know, hundreds, thousands of pearls. That's what he does all day. And he sees that one pearl that he's willing to give up everything for. We'll come back to that.
Yeah.
But let's talk about that joy that person might think that is what Jesus says, that the kingdom of heaven is like that.
Yeah.
They're willing to give up everything because of the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah.
The kingdom of God. And so one of the points that I made is that the kingdom is hidden in plain sight. It's there for all to see. In both cases, I mean, other people must have come that way, but not noticed the treasure.
Yeah.
But for that man, who was fortunate, he was able to find it, but it was in plain sight. Same with the pearl merchant. Their pearls, I'm sure must have been other merchants, other people could see it.
Right.
But they were the ones who saw it, who got it. And the kingdom of God is like that. It's there for everyone, but not everybody sees it. Not everyone gets it. They think it's about something else.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
It does make sense.
Yeah.
And
because it is kind of hard to, I think, some sort of fathom, because even I will say I get it, but I'm not sure that I always do.
yeah.
But I do think that it is there, and whether or not we get it and receive it or not is for people who have eyes to see and ears to hear.
Yeah. And I wonder too, like, for us practically, are we trained to see the things of God around us? Where God's moving and where God's doing things. Are we seeing the kingdom impact of collecting 1,000 suns? Like, are we tuned into that, or are we looking at it as like, oh, we did something cool and just moving on to the next thing? Like, that is something I maybe struggle with at times, is because I wonder if sometimes I don't slow down to focus enough on like what God's doing right around me.
Well, I see that. Or maybe we see something and we looked at it so long we don't even see it anymore.
Yeah.
Or we looked at it from one perspective that we thought that was a correct perspective. We never gone around the other side and looked and say, hey, there's a new way of looking at this thing.
Yeah.
We don't really know what kind of kingdom impact this might be having,
Because I've had conversations too with people where they'll be like, I don't know, like, I was at this place and God did this. And sometimes I'm like, that just kind of feels like the normal. Or do you know what I mean? Like people will show that there's certain credits or something.
Yeah, and I think what could get lost in these parables, but I think what gets lost on us is the way that the kingdom works as compared to the kingdom of God as the way to the kingdom of this world works.
Yeah.
And so we tend to fall into old lines of this is the way the world actually works. And it's driven by economics. It's driven by competition.
Yep.
It's driven by power, political power and stuff like that. And the kingdom is apart from that, different from that. So when Jesus says something like, love your neighbor as you love yourself, or even love your enemies. If
Right.
someone, strikes you on one cheek, then turn the other to him. That, we say, oh, that sounds great. Oh, yeah, we get that. But do we really live like that? Are we really living into the kingdom? Or do we just say, that's kind of idealistic? It would be nice, but that's not really how the world works.
Yeah.
And that's what I fear. It's easy to point out in others. It's hard to identify sometimes in one's own self or in one's own church of how that might be happening. It was like, yeah, we say we're into the kingdom of God and we're trying to pursue the kingdom of God and bring the kingdom of God to earth as it is in heaven. And yet, are we using the same rules and the same sort of values that are worldly values?
Right.
And I think that's part of what can be discovered in reading the parables. And so let's get into the second one.
Yeah.
Because the second one is one that really I kind of woke up to this week. I get the first one, and it's kind of unfortunate. They're both sort of economics or money driven because they're both dealing with that, so we can make it about that.
Yeah, we kind of like to assume value of something, especially if they're willing to give up a lot of stuff for it. It must be more valuable than what they're giving up is in our heads.
Yeah, one of the slides that I put up was that, it doesn't say good economics is like or
Yeah.
good business practices is like. It says the kingdom of God is like.
Yeah.
And so I think that's important for us. So the second guy, if you really stop to think about this second one, this guy, he is a pearl merchant. So we imagine, and these are things we're reading into the parable, but a pearl merchant, we would imagine, has some means. Okay?
Yes.
He is not like your typical like poor laborer kind of person. He's a pearl merchant. He finds this pearl of great price that compels him to go and sell everything. So now he has nothing. Whatever wealth he has is gone. He just has the pearl. So he has nothing to live on except for this pearl. And the pearl is worth nothing unless he then sells it again.
Yeah.
And so, I don't think Jesus is saying, hey, he made this great investment in this pearl and he's going to be able to go and sell it and get more money. I think it's about the pearl.
Yeah.
And that just possessing the pearl because of its beauty, that is what the kingdom of God is like.
Yeah.
And that's hard to wrap your mind around and understanding of like how does this thing work until you see somebody like the Apostle Paul say, all this other stuff that I have, I consider rubbish. It's garbage to be thrown out to following Christ. Yeah. And watch a person, and I mentioned two people yesterday, St. Francis of Assisi, who came from a very wealthy family. Yeah. And, there's pretty famous stories of him, like when he renounced all that and became, took a vow of poverty and basically took off all his clothes. I didn't do this in church yesterday. Took off his clothes and
Thanks for that, by the way.
Walked naked because he was renouncing all of that because for him, that was the way to find his home in the kingdom of God. He gave that away. And then the other person I mentioned was Henry Nouwen, who at the height of, and it's kind of, for me in the church and sort of like a church nerd kind of person, Henry Nouwen was extremely famous at the time. Yeah. Everybody wanted to go to a conference and hear Henry Nouwen. His books sold, for the Christian market were huge sellers. And in the middle of that, he leaves it all and he goes to this place called L'Abri, which was a center that took care of very people with extreme disabilities. The person that he's assigned to, that he took care of for the rest of his life, was a person who couldn't even speak.
Right.
And he certainly couldn't read what Henry had written, and he could not even have a conversation. But he took care of this person, and in that, he discovers the kingdom of God. And so a lot of people, and we might even have a discussion now, is like, was he using the talents that God had given him to the utmost, or was he like throwing all that away to chase after this thing person? So, there's been a lot of conversations around that in certain circles about like, what a loss he was, but yet he was willing to give all that away to gain, to be at home, to gain peace.
Did anywhere, I'm just curious now, in your study, did in either case with Henry or St. Francis, like, was there something that like was put out of like what compelled them to do these things?
I think I can't say for Henry now.
Okay.
But I do think their influence is felt, and actually because they did what they did, they actually, and here again I'm using worldly terms, their message had more power because of that sacrifice that they made.
Right.
I don't think that's what compelled them to do it.
Yeah.
But it's of St. Francis that really he came up in a time when it was they call them the dark ages of the church. I mean, there was a lot of corruption and a lot of things going on. And he was the bright and shining example within that. There's a pretty famous story of him going and confronting the Pope about the corruption, and the Pope listening to him because of the voice that he had. He wasn't a threat. He wasn't a person playing politics. He came, there was no guile that he had when he came, for his audience with the Pope. So, I think what compelled him was that he, maybe like all of us, I think that he just realized that this earthly wealth that he had, the privilege that he had because of that was keeping him from serving God to the depths that he wanted to.
Sure.
With Henry Nouwen, there's some written, and he actually, there is some writing that he did afterwards. I don't fully understand where he was coming from. I mean, there's a book I actually referred to the week before called The Return of the Prodigal, which he goes into some of his testimony about that journey that he was on, and he was there was a real complexity about Henry Nouwen, and we'll do a whole series of podcasts about that later.
Okay.
We're talking about that, but I do think they're great examples of people that got it, that were willing to give it all away for the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
And that serves as an example for us.
Well, I'll say that this is something that challenges me consistently. Is this idea of like, would I give everything? And I love the church. I feel like I have an active relationship with Christ. But I still, and maybe this is one of my growing edges still, I know I'm not a complete Christian by any means or anything like that. I still have a long way to go, but how do I get myself to a spot where I'm like, yeah, I would give up everything for this?
I think because of the nature of those parables, we make it about economics, we make it about money. I don't really think that's the point. I think it's about giving away. And because if not, we make it into a thing that the kingdom of God can be bought and sold. That like, you want the kingdom of God, then you sell the stuff and you've got the kingdom. It is not about the money. I think it's about the heart.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it so deeply complex.
Right.
And when we see it, we know it. And I do think, and I'm not trying to do this in any way, because I do think there is a huge cost there, the cost in discipleship. Take up your cross. Jesus, with his discussion to the rich young ruler, what you want to follow after me? What do I require? Well, do these things. I've done all these things since the youth. Then sell everything and follow me. And he goes away sad because he can't do it. So I do think that there is that element to it, but I do think it's different things for different people. That is not to make an excuse about about sacrifice.
Yeah.
But it's not just about what kind of sacrifice. I think when we get a hold of it that way, that's the way there can be a lot of abuse with church or with religion, when we make it about you must do these things.
Sure.
I think that's the mystery of these parables. A lot of them are not easy to understand.
Yeah.
And the first two I think that we did, the prodigal son and the good Samaritan, there's levels there too, but I think they're much more easy to understand than the ones that we're getting into now.
Yeah.
Because as simple as these two parables may be, there's some complexity there. Well, what does this really mean?
Yeah.
If I were to take this literally,
Yeah.
it leads you to one place. If you begin to look at the symbolism and what was Jesus actually talking about, and you actually look at the other things that were happening around there, there's 4 or 5 parables we didn't look at that he strings together, and they're all about the kingdom of God, and they all kind of take us to a different place.
Right.
There's judgment in some of those, which we'll get into that. I'm going to do the parable of the great judgment, the sheep and the goats in Matthew 25. I will do that one before this is all over. But there's things about judgment in there too, and that sometimes that's not very comfortable for us. What we do and what we don't do will be judged for.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So I guess if we've heard these kind of parables, and you kind of had a 3 points. Can you run through those 3 points again for us?
Well, that was all the way to yesterday, but let me see.
Okay.
I think I can
Ish.
if I go through.
Yeah.
Ish, yeah. Well, I think the first one was that there's surprise.
Yeah.
There's an element of a surprise in each of them. Yeah, I do think there was some seeking going on.
Right.
But they just weren't expecting to find what they found.
Yeah.
To the point that they were willing to give up everything. And so there was a surprise. And one of the points I made out of that was, I think another word for that is grace.
Yeah.
And I looked, because I know lots of times people get hung up with using the word lucky in church. There's no whatever. I don't go crazy about that. But yeah, that you would feel lucky. I mean, that's the surprise. Like, why should it be me that found this pearl?
Yeah.
There is grace there. And it goes back to the Beatitudes, this upside down kingdom of God that we find in the Beatitudes.
Yeah.
It starts off with, blessed are the poor in spirit. Really? Blessed are the poor in spirit? Why are they blessed?
Why would I want to be that?
That seems weird. But another way of using the word there, blessed, is, some translations use fortunate, or you could say lucky. Lucky is the one. And so they may not be feeling very fortunate, very lucky, but that is, if they discover the kingdom of God, then they are.
Yeah.
And so that was the first one, is that it is, there's a surprise element to it. Yeah.
And you were talking about there being a seeking element, and you told a story yesterday about a real life example where somebody dug up 7 cans of gold coins or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
And I was thinking about that, and when you said that there's an element of seeking, it kind of made me go, oh yeah, somebody had to grab a shovel, or not necessarily that they were looking for the treasure.
Let's take that story.
They were doing something.
They weren't. They bought some property. They've been, I don't know how long they've been living there. I don't know the whole story.
Yeah.
But this happened out in California in 2018, I think it was. But they were taking their dog for a walk on their property, and the dog started digging, and they found that in there in their yard, I think there were 8 or 10 large cans. There were 1,500 gold coins, and there's worth $10 million. It's the biggest treasure find in that. That was a surprise.
Would you have dug up the rest of the yard, by the way?
I'm sure they did.
Yeah, I'd have dug every square inch of that thing.
The police, and it's called the Saddle Ridge Treasure.
Yeah.
And you can Google it, and they are still anonymous because they don't want people digging on their property. I'm sure there was some more digging that went on, but they went out and they dug, and they found 10 in all. And so,
crazy.
But it was a surprise, and how fortunate, and how blessed, and how lucky they were.
Yeah.
And I think that the kingdom of God is like that. So there's this element of surprise, and I think when you experience that sort of grace and fortune, the only response that we have, or our response should be that of humility and gratitude.
Yeah, I kind of take it to another space too. Is maybe encountering the kingdom of God is kind of like encountering God. Is the times in my life where I have I feel like I've experienced God, I've encountered God. All of them have been surprises. Like
Yeah.
I didn't go into it going, God's going to show up right here, right now. It's been, as a kid is playing a crappy guitar in worship, but I was just moved in certain ways or whatever through a story or on a mission trip to, like, I wasn't necessarily going, I'm going to find God in the kingdom of heaven right here. Like I was just going and serving, and it always kind of came as like it always came when I least expected it, I guess.
Right, yeah, and then we tried to imitate and come back to that,
Yeah.
and try to somehow or another bottle it so that we
Yeah.
can, bottle and sell. But I mean, I don't think it's that nefarious. We're trying
no.
to make a profit of it. But it's just like we've had this experience. We want other people to have it too.
Correct.
And sometimes it just comes at a gift in that one moment.
Right.
No, sometimes we are onto something that can be replicated and become a movement. But many times it's just what happens in that moment. And I think we kind of got at the other 2 points that I made. The one was that it's hidden in plain sight. I think we talked about that. But the last one was that it costs everything, but yet there's no monetary value on it. So, with the guy with the pearl, it's cost him everything, but it isn't that, you can't measure that in a worldly thing it's like, because otherwise you can't measure that in worldly terms.
Yeah.
Because the treasure is the pearl that he has found, which cost him everything. He is now poor because he has nothing. He sold everything to have that. But if he sells that pearl, he's lost it. And so that's the mystery and pondering. And there's not that's where this is an example of that, the emotions that went into that, the element of that, not that exact event, And so with that, what it becomes for that person, what to discover the kingdom of God. And lots of times because we are so drawn to power and to money, it does, I think, become giving those away.
Sure.
Because we don't know how to use them correctly.
Yeah. In both stories, and maybe I'm off base here, but like, why did they have to give up everything? This guy walked across this land, found the treasure. If it was finders keepers, why didn't he just pick it up and take it? Or, with the pearl merchant, obviously they're sifting through, somebody gave him pearls. Why didn't he, if he didn't have to assign a value to it, why didn't he just be like, I
don't think, well, first of all, that would be stealing, Nick.
Well, is it his to sell though? As a pearl merchant, does he already own it, or does somebody give it to him?
I don't know how that works.
Okay.
I was imagining like somebody's coming and they've come in and
they brought their pearls to him to see if he wants to buy them.
Fishermen or whoever gathered that, are getting them to sell, and what price would you pay for it?
The image I have in my head is like him in a box and sifting through what they've got.
I don't think this was his inventory.
Okay.
I don't think it was his inventory.
Okay.
I don't think that's the
I'm not
implication
suggesting
there.
somebody should steal.
It's 2 sentences long, but
Sure.
that's the way I think it worked. And in the other case, that would be, and that would not be the kingdom of God. But it's like the willingness to give that up to do that correctly, And so, but it's not something that we think about. And I did like the example I used, and I don't know how I thought about it because I hadn't thought about this song in a year, but the 110 Soldier. Were you familiar with that? Or are you too young for that? Or
I don't remember. I've never heard that song, but I wasn't a big camp kid. You were saying
it was a camp song, but I do understand it. Like somebody told me it was in a movie, but I think I was just before me.
Yeah.
I think I do kind of remember it being on the radio, but it definitely was a camp song when I was at Camp Glisson. And I sang it in the youth group when I was with guitar when I was a youth director. But it's a story about these mountain people that lived up, and they have this treasure, and the people down in the valley find out about it, and they want it, and they're willing to go to war to get it. And so they send the message up to the mountain people. They say, "Hey, we'll share." And so they would say, "Oh, no, we're going to own this thing. We're going to have it for full." So they go up and they kill the mountain people, and then when they open, turn the stone and look beneath it, peace on earth was all it said.
Yeah.
And so, that the real treasure was peace on earth.
Right.
And I think that is getting it when you realize that is something you're willing to give your life for. You're willing to sell everything for this treasure that is the kingdom of God.
Yep.
And I think that's the point that Jesus is trying to drive home there, and he talks a lot. He talks a lot about the kingdom of God. He talked about it more than anything else.
Right.
And so it is hidden in plain sight because we still don't get it. We're still seeking to understand it. Sure. And there's so much mystery, and that he came in to usher in the kingdom, so the kingdom is here, but yet the kingdom is not here yet.
Yeah.
So we're working towards bringing the kingdom on earth, and when we can see it and begin to respond in it, I think that's when we begin to move, God's will on earth as it is in heaven. We begin to have the kingdom of God enter here into our time.
Right.
So,
well, good. Well, Dave, that was good stuff. I appreciate you sharing that. And we are kind of at our time, so we're going to kind of wrap up. What do we have coming next week? Any previews?
Well, just a little bit. Juan is preaching this week. It's Juan Quintanilla has been with us for 6 months and has been such a gift to all of us. He has been a treasure for us. But Juan has been reappointed by the United Methodist Church to another church, and so this will be his last Sunday with us. He'll be preaching for us, and we're doing a little reception for him afterwards. We're here on staff. We're taking him out to lunch tomorrow. We're going to miss Juan.
Yeah, we are.
He is for somebody to be here for such a short time and make such a big impact.
Yeah.
It's pretty remarkable. But he's just such a Christian guy.
Yeah.
We've learned so much from him.
So much peace, so much humility.
He does bring peace, yeah.
Like just service,
So we'll be celebrating him on Sunday. A little bit, it's 4th of July is in the middle of the week. But so this Sunday we've chosen to do some sort of patriotic stuff too.
Cool.
Looking forward to 4th of July, although it's not till Thursday.
Yeah.
We figured that the next Sunday people would already moved on, so we're going to do it this Sunday.
No more patriotism. We're keeping up.
Well, I mean,
I'm
joking.
joking.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, come join us. Come celebrate Juan. We'd love to have you guys at service. So on Sundays, our service starts at 10 o'clock. So come hang out with us. But other than that, about the podcast, if you got any comments, you can drop them in the chats below on the Facebook and the YouTube. And without further ado, thank you guys so much for watching. We'll catch you next time.
Yeah, God bless.